All right, so new information is coming out every single day, but I think this information, this evidence that we're going to go over in just a few minutes is going to change your mind on a lot of different things. Let's get into it. Hey folks, Gary here with Paramount. And I think like many of you out there, July 13th had a pretty profound effect on me, as it did the rest of the nation. I think it was clearly an attack on our country, a clearly attack on our democratic electoral system, and it had the major impact of just further erosion of our trust in government institutions and our own capabilities here in the United States. I think it's pretty hard for us to understand, or at least to process, when we have what we believe to be the absolute premier, the best in the world when it comes to personal protection, the Secret Service. And when we see such utter incompetence of what we think are the absolute best in the world, the idea of a conspiracy automatically jumps into mind. And I think we should. We should ask those questions because I think that is actually a very real possibility. And we're going to explore some of that tonight. But I really do think it's important that we have an insider look and an understanding of what normal looks like, right? So for us to determine something suspicious, we have to have a baseline or what normal looks like so that we can pick out the things that are suspicious, that aren't normal, and we can direct our attention to those. Because I do think there's been a lot of theories thrown out, and ultimately a lot of them that are easily proven wrong that get us distracted. As a matter of fact, if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend that you go watch my interview with a former Secret Service counter sniper unit member. You can go watch that right there. It's part 1 and part 2. I think it's going to give you a real inside look at how the Secret Service works. And I think you'll find that very informative, to say the least, and it give you a better idea of what's going on. But there's 2 theories that keep coming up that I want to address head on tonight. Number 1 is the water tower, right? We think we see somebody on the water tower. What does that mean? If it was someone on the water tower, did they get a shot off at Trump? The other thing that I've heard a lot of is that was actually possibly a government counter sniper unit that actually shot the shooter, and that the Secret Service counter sniper team that we think shot them didn't actually shoot them. We're going to address both of those. The other theory that's very pervasive that keeps getting talked about is, and it's kind of linked into that sort of as well, but that's the second shooter theory, or the open window theory, and that's what I'm going to call them just for the sake of it. But we're going to go through all this tonight, and we're going to give you some pretty compelling evidence. Then after we go through that evidence, I'm going to let you know what my thoughts are on it, or my conclusions are there. And I want to know from you if you agree with that. And if I didn't address something to that, I also want you to put that down in the comments so we can try to address that head on in another video or in a podcast. Because that's what I want this channel to be. I want this channel to be a collection point where we can come together and we can talk through this. And we've already had some experts on. We're going to have more. But I want to be able to have a open and honest discourse on this so that we can do what we can to make sure that we're not distracted by things that are easily proven wrong. And I think no matter what, regardless if this was an intentional conspiracy or it was just a matter of other bad policies, getting put into play, like DEI, like lower standards, or even politics that came into play that, they intentionally withheld resources to keep Trump safe because they don't like him or because they see him as a political enemy. I think those are all things that need to be looked at, and we, the American people, need to stay focused on what is real and what's not. And by the way, if you like content like this, make sure you like, subscribe, throw a comment down below. That helps us out. Go check out our other social media sites. We do a lot of cool things on there. And every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, right here on YouTube and Rumble, we have our live Dangerous Liberty podcast, where we talk about all of this, guns, gear, training, politics. We have special guests on. We're definitely going to be covering this topic for a while. But you get to participate. It's live. All right, we're going to read your comments. We're going to take your questions, and we want to include you into the conversation so you're not just screaming at the screen like you do listening to other podcasts or listening to other videos like this. So make sure you come join us, be part of the community, and be part of the solution. That's really what it's about. All right, so let's get right into this. So first of all, we have the water tower. So let's take a look at this video, and we're going to zoom in. We're going to analyze this a little bit. I'm going to give you my thoughts on that.
Take a look at what happened.
You see a shadow on a highly pixelated screen there. There's a couple things that go through my mind. I am a former sniper. We currently teach long range. I've been shooting long range for a long time. I spent a lot of time behind cameras, filming all this stuff. I am used to looking through optics and seeing mirage and other artifacts that take place because light is being distorted. And quite frankly, that's what I see there. I could be wrong. I'm willing to admit that. The other thing that I'm really curious about, and I was looking for some sort of, blueprints online, is trying to get an idea how tall that water tower is and that thing coming out of the middle of it is, how tall that is. I'd like to know, how tall that is, and I guess that's probably some sort of ventilation. That would give us an idea if there was a person standing up there or not, and then, does a person size jive with what we're seeing compared to how tall that is? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you on that. I don't think that that's a person. The other thing I'll say is if you were going to put someone on that water tower, at the very top of that where it's sloping, and I don't mean to sound like Director Cheadle here, it was too sloped, but that's a really bad place to be on a water tower. When you're talking about a water tower, those things have layers and layers of paint on there. The tops of those are very slick. I've been on water towers. I've never been on the very top like that, but I've been on the catwalk around there. Usually those catwalks around a water tower are like 18 inches, 24 inches. There's not a lot of room to maneuver. If I was a shooter, or as my old job as a sniper, that's not a place that I would want to be. And on top of that, it'd be almost impossible to get a stable shooting position from a standing position up there. It'd be very, very difficult to get a good standing shooting position up there. It didn't look to me like there was anything that would indicate that we're using a tripod or any other type of thing that would provide additional stability. So that's my initial thoughts. The other thing that I immediately thought of when I saw this video was, this obviously came from a cell phone. It's very pixelated, it's far distance. All the cameras in the cell phones use a lot of processor power to manipulate the photo. They're constantly trying to to sharpen that image. And that has been known to distort images as well. Let's put my personal opinion on this aside for a minute. Let's say that was a person up there. What does that mean? What's the follow-on questions for that? The questions to me are, did they shoot from that position? I'd say it's very difficult to shoot from that position, but forget about that. Did they shoot President Trump? Were they shooting at Crooks? What does that mean? And can we prove that one way or the other? And I think we have an answer to both of those questions. But let's put the water tower theory on hold for just a second. Let's talk about the second shooter theory or the open window theory. And I'm going to play you some video. If you haven't seen this before, we're going to see what this is. And then I'm also going to show you video from inside of that room to be able to show you the view outside that room and the possibility of there being a second shooter in general, but even more specifically, a second shooter inside of that room. Because I'll be honest with you, if I was a sniper trying to take out Trump in a urban area like this, which really this is, anytime that we have structures, this is urban sniping, right? Where you typically want to be is in the rear of a room or even in a next room, looking through one room, through a window, through your target. So all that distance gives you a loophole to shoot through, and it obscures your sound signature as well as muzzle blast. So let's take a look at this and see how viable this theory is.
Behind it, there's a window here. And in this room up here, you can very easily see onto the top of this building. This position right here has total vantage to see the entirety of the roof here. And so
all right, so just from that video, we can tell that, number one, that window absolutely provides a good vantage point to President Trump, without a doubt. It also gives us a good vantage point to potentially align our shot with Crooks to some extent. I'll be honest with you, this is exactly what I thought was the greatest possibility. This was the conspiracy that I definitely thought, hey, you know what? If I was going to create a patsy for this, I'd want a competent shooter covering an incompetent shooters and then make sure that the incompetent shooter takes the fall. And the more that we can align those shots, the better off we are. But then I saw this bit of evidence from Mike Bell. Here's his information right here. Make sure you go give him a follow. I think he's done an excellent job with this. I also like the fact that he is out of South Africa, doesn't really seem to have a dog in the fight. He's just curious, very smart guy, and has made some really good animations that I think are actually, these provide some of the best evidence, these trajectories specifically, provide us the best evidence of what is real and what is not that I've seen out there at all. And while there's been a lot of analysis done on sound and all these other things we'll talk about in just a minute, there's been almost no real analysis of these trajectories the way that he has. And I think that has done a disservice to this entire discussion because, well, watch this and then tell me what you think at the end of it.
These are all these 8 shots from the same weapon and then a different one. 8 shell casings were found next to the murderer, according to officials. That was the same number deduced from the data before hearing the official count.
Some people are saying there were shots coming from a water tower or something. Where's that water tower?
Now, here's the trajectories, and I think this is what matters the most. Because what he does here with the trajectory analysis, which really isn't being done anywhere else, at least not to this level, I think gives us the most important information that we've received so far.
Okay. Oh, it's over there. Okay.
Yeah. So some people were saying that on top of the water tower, I mean, they see a blob and the blob moves. And the other reason why that's complete nonsense. The guy wouldn't have had a shot because it's blocked by the big screen. It's impossible shot.
All right, so let's talk about the water tower now with that information in mind. I've heard 2 kind of competing theories with the water tower. I've heard people say that the shots at Trump came from the water tower. And then again, I've heard where people say, hey, the shots that took Crooks out came from the water tower. I think this should definitively answer both of those. The line of sight from the water tower to Trump was blocked by that information board that Trump was looking at. On top of that, the trajectories just don't match up. We would have rounds impacting in different places, had those shots come from the water tower. So given the different angles and what we expect to see in trajectories, I think we can rule out the shots going toward Trump as being, from the water tower. I don't think that the people being hit would have been hit. They're not in the same trajectory as well. So I think that pretty much rules that out. Now, here's the question of whether or not the shot that ended Crooks' life or a shot at Crooks came from the water tower. There are pictures out there that show Crooks where he was shot in the face. He was actually shot just above the left eye. There is no trajectory from the water tower that would allow that. But just looking at the angle that we have here is we would see a round that would, whether it hit or miss Crooks, that round would penetrate that roof without a doubt. So there's no evidence of that. Hopefully everybody's seen the video with the law enforcement on top of the roof. They're looking around the roof. There's video panning around that roof. I don't see any holes in the roof. They could have been hidden. I'm not saying that, but there also has been people up there. I think Michael Knowles just did a show up there. I didn't want to include all of that different video within this video just to keep it as short as possible. If you want to look that information up, you can, but most of you have already seen those videos. So I think, just based on trajectory, we can rule out the water tower. We don't necessarily even need to rule out whether or not there was somebody up there. Maybe there was somebody up there, but I don't think there's any evidence that shows that anyone fired from the water tower. Now let's take a look at the second shooter window theory.
Okay, then the other shot that people are talking about is this one over here, which is from this window, and this is the view. And they would have certainly from this view seen Crooks, and supposedly in these offices should have been security people, and they would have seen the stage, but doesn't really make any sense.
Well, then they couldn't have hit his ear from that angle, it doesn't look like.
Yeah, it would have been difficult. And also the shot doesn't go past any of the victims. The victims were over there. There was the fatality. And here was David Dutch standing over here, and then James Copenhaver, who was sitting over there, or standing, we're not sure. So we know those are the 3 victims, which line up with the shot coming from Crooks, and the shot out the window doesn't go anywhere. That makes sense with what we see.
So again, trajectories, I think give us more compelling evidence than anything else that we've seen, and he does a good job with that. So I think that is that's pretty compelling to me. Knowing what I know about shooting from inside a window, those trajectories don't line up. They don't line up. They could hit Trump from inside that window. I think it'd be very difficult or doesn't make sense to me, and especially understand if you're shooting out a window and this person would typically want to be in the back of the room. I'm not saying that's what happened, but there's no video evidence, or even there was people on the ground, that were looking up at that building while Crooks was shooting. So we see a lot of video evidence of that. And if there was a person hanging out the window, they're hanging out the window, it's going to broaden how far they can shoot and probably make those trajectories align more. But without seeing somebody hanging out the window, tells me if there was a second shooter, they're deep in that room. And if they're deep in that room, they have that window that they're looking at. And look, you can actually even illustrate this to yourself. If you go to the back of a room, you see a small window. And again, the window that we're talking about does look fairly small. But if you're at the back of the room, 10, 15 feet from that window, if you find a target, your sector of fire that you're able to achieve at the back of a room of that window, or even offset from that window at any distance, is very limited. So I don't think any of the trajectories that we know took place, which were those 3 rounds, we're going to talk about the other 5 rounds here in just a second, and we're going to talk about other possible rounds as well. But I don't think that any of the 3 rounds that we have confirmed that hit people or hit things came from anything other than Crooks's position. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I don't think there's any evidence that suggests otherwise.
From that angle, it doesn't look like.
Yeah, it would have been difficult. And also the shot doesn't go past any of the victims. The victims were over there. There was the fatality. And here was David Dutch standing over here, and then James Copenhagen, who was sitting over there, or standing, we're not sure. So we know those are the 3 victims, which line up with the shot coming from Crooks, and the shot out the window doesn't go anywhere. That makes sense with what we see.
To me, this is the most conclusive evidence, and I've tried to sit here and kind of steel man this and pull it apart. And I don't see anything that makes sense. So, but that's my conclusion based on this evidence. And I think this is the best evidence we've seen that has mapped out those trajectories as precise as possible. So I find all that extremely compelling. And the question is, do you? And if not, again, leave those down in the comments. I want to hear what you have to say about that, or let me know if I'm missing something, because I'm definitely open to finding additional information out there that we can analyze and take another look at. The other thing is, well, Gary, I've heard a 9th shot and a 10th shot. There are reports on the ground that local snipers took additional shots. I don't even know if I've heard that in an official report. I hear that more as rumor, and I could be wrong in that. But let's say we did hear a 9th and 10th shot. Okay, so what consequence is that? We're not seeing any evidence of a 9th and 10th shot anywhere. Those could have been local law enforcement snipers taking shots at Crooks. I'm not aware that they actually hit him. I'm not aware of any other information that's pointing to that we have impacts. We have the idea or rumors of shots fired, but we have no actual impacts. Even if that's true, that there were additional shots fired, I think that those shots most likely came from local law enforcement. And then for whatever reason, they didn't have an overall impact of the situation, good, bad, or indifferent. But again, right in the comments, let me know what you think on that. All right, so we covered the water tower theory. We covered the second shooter, at least from the open window theory. If we have additional theories of possible other shooters that might align with the trajectories that we have, because I think that's those trajectories are pretty important. Those are the best indicators. That is rock solid information. We know rounds hit this person, this person, and this person. So if we're going to talk about an additional shooter, we have to have those align as well. And I'm waiting to see that, and I'm open to seeing that. All right, so now that I've given evidence against those theories, I know I'm going to get hit up in the comments. You're a propagandist from the state, all this other stuff. Folks, you clearly don't know the channel if you think this. I'll tell you right now that I personally believe that the U.S. government definitely had a hand in the JFK assassination. And, I'm probably about 50-50 on the moon landing personally. So that's where I stand on conspiracies. I'm completely open to them without a doubt. So what does that leave us? Look, I do think that there is a real chance of conspiracy. And here's my couple of hypotheses that I'm going to throw out there. Number one, I think there was a real conspiracy of, at a minimum, that we had government officials intentionally denying resources to President Trump because of their own political bias and their hostility toward Trump. That conspiracy to me is not only a real possibility, I think that's highly likely. So that's number one. Number two, the second conspiracy or hypothesis that I'm definitely willing to consider, and I think all of us should look into, is was Crooks prepared, assisted, or radicalized by our own government? I think that's something we really need to look into. We saw what took place with the FBI in Michigan, where they essentially prepared, radicalized, encouraged, a couple of nitwits to basically conspire to attack and or kidnap, I believe, Governor Whitmer. These were two men that were, by all accounts, were genuinely mentally deficient that the FBI was able to influence and to convince to be part of this conspiracy to kidnap Governor Whitmer. You know, was that something that they did to Crooks and then just let him keep going? I don't know. What I do know is that we've never seen hostilities directed by the federal government toward a candidate like President Trump. And I think everything's on the table. I think what they have done to him on the documents case, on many of these other legal cases that have continued to fall apart. I think given all that, you know, you really have to take a hard look at, hey, you know, did they run out of options and then actually plan to execute President Trump? I don't know. I think those are things that we have to genuinely consider. Maybe they knew about Crooks and his plans and just let it happen. Or maybe they had a more direct involvement in it. Or maybe they just knew that by denying security resources to, for better or worse, one of the most polarizing political figures in American history, that this would just be the natural outcome, that somebody would end up taking shots at him. And, you know, they thought that if they just didn't give those resources that they knew he should have, that any person doing any sort of risk assessment, security, vulnerability assessment, look, Trump should have had a lot of more resources than we had on the ground. We should have had a lot more prep work done on the advance. And look, in that interview that I did with that former Secret Service counter sniper team member, he talks about what should have been done, what normal should have looked like, given the fact that, number one, he was the candidate apparent, and that he was a former president. So I'm definitely not against the idea that there was a conspiracy. I just don't think that right now we have any evidence of anyone that was shooting from the water tower, really anyone on the water tower. But if there was, I don't think that's consequential. And number two, I don't think there's any evidence that we have of a second shooter. And I don't think there's evidence that there was a shooter specifically within that open windows. But again, tell me where I'm wrong down in the comments, or if you agree with me, let me know that as well. And make sure you join us this Wednesday when we'll talk about this again. All right, so hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you found it informative. I'm sure I left some things out. I'm sure I got some things wrong. I'm sure I have some things that you disagree with. Let me know all that down in the comments and we'll discuss it. Or again, come join us this Wednesday. We can talk about it live Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time right here on YouTube and Rumble. And, you know, while politics are great, what we're about is training. So make sure you go to ParamountTactical.com. Go check out our upcoming training schedule. We'd love to have you out. We'd love to meet you in person. Most of our instructors are former special operations. Come train with us. You'll be glad you did. And for all your gear needs, make sure you go to ParamountTactical.com. But until next time, stay armed, stay ready. We'll talk to you soon.